So with this, I'd like to welcome, we have a rare opportunity. I don't know if you guys have had this situation happen before where the most commonly used we're going to stick with VLEs because of our host. You guys know I also mean LMS, but virtual learning environment. Not only is it appropriate in Leeds, it's a better description of what happens. This is the environment where students access their learning. But I will have each of our guests introduce themselves, but Melissa from Instructure, Scott from Moodle, Cristi from D2L, and Nico from Anthology Blackboard. So we have an opportunity to do this, and people have asked me several times, are you really going to ask them the tough questions? The focus of this summit, and I want to stick to it, is really looking at change and how are we going to improve pedagogy. So I'd like to use this as an opportunity to say, what is the VLE platform and platform companies' role in enabling a lot of the changes that we're going through? So to address Margaret's question from the introduction, I'll go ahead and state, no, we are not where we need to be for the future of learning. There's a lot of aspects that they're going to change whether we want them or not, in terms of skills-based, less based on past assumptions, a different improved kind of access. So we have to do change. That's where we are. Yesterday, we had the chance to visit the Helix lab or Helix site, looking at the innovation there. I almost fell down from the virtual reality. Cristi knows that well, but I didn't, so that's a good thing. Oh, you did? Oh my goodness. Okay, so we do have that. So I want to start off by focusing on that and what is your role. But to get the conversation started, I'd like to ask each of our panelists if you could introduce yourself, your role at your company, but also a quick view of where you've been before that so that people understand where you're coming from. And if you could answer one leading question, one is the key answer. What one aspect will define post-secondary learning in 10 years from now in contrast to 2015? So we'll start with Melissa.
With me? Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Melissa Loble. I'm the Chief Academic Officer at Instructure. That is a role for me that's been about the last year and a half. I was our first Chief Academic Officer, hopefully continuing in that role. But I've been at Instructure just under 12 years now. And as Phil asked a little bit about where we're coming from, I spent my entire career in higher education, either on the university side or on the vendor side. And so happy to be able to experience both. And I'm also proud to say I've taught online now for 25 years. It was the very first venue I learned how to teach on, really, in many ways. And I've taught undergraduates, graduates. I teach in a certificate or an alternative credential program now, and much of those experiences has influenced the work that I do at Instructure. So the question of what's the change?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So perhaps I'll start with something maybe a little controversial. It certainly is a little controversial in the U.S. I believe student agency is going to be a huge change for us. And I say student agency in the way, not only how they experience online learning, but how they craft their own paths to degrees or certificates or alternative credentials or whatever it may be. So by this, it means a student may not do all of their work at one institution. They may not get their entire degree at one institution. They may build pathways that combine both institutional learning and professional learning in the workplace. But being able to control and have agency over that, I think, is something that, particularly as institutions, we need to be thinking about, because it does change our model and how we articulate experiences, learning, and how we interact with learners as they come in and out of our institutions.
All right. Thank you. Scott?
Good morning, everybody. I'm Scott Anderberg. I'm the CEO at Moodle. This is a relatively new role for me. I've been at Moodle for just about 18 months. But it's kind of a homecoming because I started my career in the LMS space with a company called eCollege back in the very early 2000s. eCollege was acquired by Pearson. And post that acquisition, I moved to London for the first time. So I was in Denver, came over to London in a market development role to try and work out where could we put that product and solution set outside the United States. Spent about 3 years in that role with some extensive travel through the Middle East and Africa. And it was really that has sort of fueled the rest of my career, because it became so obvious traveling through and looking at the education systems in those developing countries, how much access changes the kind of opportunities for entire societies. And so that has fueled everything since. I then sort of shifted into the OPM space, went back to Denver for a bit, went to Australia and spent 3.5 years setting up Pearson's OPM business down there. Thought at the end of 2015 we were ready to go back to the US and settle. We bought a house, we got a dog, and found out 12 months in we were not quite as ready to settle as we thought. That brought us back to the UK, and I spent 6 years in Pearson's online program management leadership for everything outside of North America. I exited Pearson with some of these Boundless colleagues that are in the room, and shortly after that transaction closed, I had the opportunity to join Moodle. So it's been quite a journey across continents and companies, but I'm really delighted to be here. Excuse me. In terms of the big thing that I think is going to influence education over the next 10 years, so I think this is going to sound like it's more than one answer, but it's really not.
You're not running for office, but okay.
Yeah, no, I mean, one thing is a little reductive.
Yeah.
I think fundamentally so many things are changing and challenging the functional value of higher education, of universities themselves. AI is eradicating the notion of knowledge scarcity. The way and the speed at which we can assess people is changing dramatically, and things are moving towards competency-based assessment, particularly in the career space. The notion of traditional curriculum design is being changed by individualization and the number of learning paths that students can choose. And the fact that everything is moving to hybrid or remote means that these grand buildings and places to gather are really being challenged in terms of their economic viability and even their necessity. But probably more than anything else, I think we're at the beginning of having to really ask, what is knowledge and what does it mean to know? I mean, that's changing rapidly. It's a core fundamental change, and that is at the heart of what universities have done for well over 200 years. And so I think the thing that is really going to change education is how universities respond to that question. What is their purpose when the notion of knowledge, or what it means to know, is changing every day? And they're going to have to grapple with that, because the functional value that they have given through all these other things are being challenged by all of those changes right at their heart.
All right. Thank you. We will let that stand, by the way. So, Cristi?
Hi, colleagues. I'm Dr. Cristi Ford, Chief Learning Officer at D2L. As I listen to my colleagues here, I think in some ways being an educator kind of transcends all other parts of my identity. I have been in K-12. I started out in K-12 working with kids on the autism spectrum back in the 90s. So I really credit those youngsters for helping me to move into distance learning over 20 years ago. Since then, I've worked most of my life in higher education, so spending time as a chief academic officer in East Africa at a women's college, to being associate vice provost at a large online institution with 100,000 online learners. So I've spent my life's career really thinking about the best practices around teaching and learning and how those best practices engage in the digital learning spaces. And so really excited to be here today and have this conversation. As I think about where we need to move, I think I'll echo both Melissa and Scott's comments. But when I think about where the learners are moving today, and thinking about the fact we now are starting to enter an age where we have digital natives, I think it's really, I take the student agency and kind of double it and say we need to really think about the co-creation of learning. If you think about, if you have young adults in your family or in your lives, think about the fact that we talk about that self-directed learning is only for the elite. But if you think about youngsters who have learned to use Minecraft or have taught themselves to play the guitar, there's a space in which institutions really need to really be able to redefine the value proposition in learning and engagement that allows students to really co-create those learning opportunities for themselves. And so I think we need to be a lot more malleable in terms of how knowledge is created, how knowledge is curated, to make sure that those opportunities are available for students to be able to co-create that learning.
Yeah, thank you. And Nico?
Perfect. Hey, good morning, everyone. And Phil, just for the record, the last time this happened, this panel was EDUCAUSE 2019, I believe.
Yeah, sure.
and I know-
That was 6 years ago.
So quite a while ago. Anyway, so hey, good morning, everyone. My name's Nico Matthijs. I'm the Chief Product Officer at Anthology and Blackboard. So from a background perspective, actually very similar story to many of my colleagues here. So I've been in higher education pretty much my entire career. I've worked for several universities in Belgium, UK, and the US, from Belgium originally. And I was also the co-founder of a small company called Frontier, which started Ally, which is a tool that gives me a little bit of a unique perspective. Obviously, it's aimed at improving accessibility. It was a tool that I got the opportunity to build that into all of the major LMSs. So I've actually have an incredible amount of experience with each of the platforms here on stage.
Which is your favorite?
And now we're talking.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in terms of kind of the big changes that I think we'll see by 2035 is, first of all, that's my least favorite question ever. Like, I don't like to predict the future. I think especially over the next 10 years, agility and being ready to pivot is going to be really important. Ask anyone that tried to predict the future before the pandemic or before ChatGPT came out. But I think if I want to be bold, I think my prediction would be that in 2035, students will feel like they are getting a better return on investment from education compared to what they're getting today or in 2015. I think that's going to be a really difficult shift, though. In order to get there, I think you got to redefine the role of the university, the role of the institution, and the role of the educator as well. And so I think as content delivery really becomes a commodity, as AI can really do a lot of that part, I think is going to shift that role from the educator and from the institution into more mentoring, coaching, community co-creation, as you said, real world experience, project based, etc. And kind of that human connection. I think that's actually going to become more important. We'll be able to spend more time on that. I'm actually really excited about that. I think that transition will be difficult. There's going to have to be a lot of change in terms of platforms, how we do assessment, et cetera, to actually get there. But I'm hopeful.
Well, and now to pull us back, because we're looking in the future, but it's your point about it's a transition, and the transition is not easy. So most colleges and universities, they might have a subset of people seeing a lot of these same changes, but that's not where they are today. So it raises the question, take a VLE company. You guys serve entire institutions, which means a lot of your post-secondary work is in term-based courses, traditional content delivery, grading, assessment, grades, quizzes, traditional education. But what we're talking about is where education is going. So, and I'm going to add one other aspect. 10, 15 years ago, at least as a consultant, you sort of weren't allowed, when you were dealing with VLEs, to get too much into pedagogy. There was pushback, certainly in the US, from the faculty saying, that's not your job, you just provide technology. I think that's improved over time, and there's sort of a multi-functional view of this. But my question for you guys is, what is your role from a company perspective in these changes? Should you guys, or how do you guys view this? Are you pushing schools to make changes or following schools to make changes? Is it affecting your roadmap? So what is your role as a company in enabling or dealing with the academic long-term changes that we just all described? And we're not doing round robin, so anybody jump in.
So I think when I think about that question, Phil, the first thing that comes to mind, I think that it's our responsibility to raise the bar to meet the learning moment in real time as human needs evolve. I think one of the things that I think about as I think about the work that we're doing specifically at D2L is we're really trying to think about the fact that as we talk with institutions that are prioritizing creativity, curiosity, deeper learning, how are we enabling with the technology to be able to meet those needs? And so I think it is a headwind and a tailwind, because when we're working with clients, for instance, in the Singapore region, their needs are very different than in the UK or the US. And so there is this push and pull, and it is our responsibility to be able to raise the bar to meet that learning moment.
But does that also imply like subsets within a university, like find the innovators and we need to make sure that they are enabled, or is it just the mainline interpretation? Like, do you actually get involved in figuring out who within a university is going to be pushing that?
Absolutely, because when you talked earlier about enabling change, right, you need to be able to figure out who are those change agents. So in some institutional cases, it is moving with those innovators. In other institutional cases, determining how things are being prioritized. We're looking to think about the sustainability and the approach that's happening. So again, as you all mentioned in the earlier panel, there's no one size fits all, but it is our responsibility to meet the change where it is at each institutional capacity.
Thank you. Other thoughts?
I think when you're facing times of significant change or challenge, binary thinking is one of the most dangerous things. That notion that, you talked about 10 or 15 years ago, this is our patch and this is your patch. You do technology, we do pedagogy. I think that is a route to completely eliminating the optical outcome, or the optimal outcome that you can get. I think we exist in very tightly connected systems, and small changes in one part of the system result in significant consequences other places. I think that kind of thinking leads to territorialism that prevents the kind of creativity and inclusivity that we need in education. And so I think that's really problematic. As a result, I think, one of the things that we have within Moodle is an enormous community, which allows us to connect people and educators and students to each other, so that you have both the advantage of the local experience in your education, as well as the global nature of drawing on other people's creativity and thinking. And so I think you have to be involved in helping to drive that change as part of the organization, but by developing and connecting relationships.
Yep.
I'll add one, and completely agree with my fellow panelists. Perhaps I will, though, put out a little bit of a boundary that we should be in, and that's the technology underpinning the solutions that we provide. So we don't know where the future is going. To be able to do that creative response to the creative approaches, the changes, the tool sets that you experience, that you described from 10 years ago, right? Great book, all of those things are going to become, while they're still important, they're going to become less important. And it's the underlying fabric of platforms that are going to become more important. So how do those platforms, and this is where our strategy, we lean in, how do we ensure that you have a core base of technology that can bring in very quickly and easily integrated tools that can allow for institutions to pivot? So for example, we're seeing from an AI perspective, institutions choosing to do four things: rely on VVLE to provide some AI capabilities, rely on innovative new upstart companies to provide AI capabilities, rely on content providers and other more traditional but perhaps larger platforms to provide AI, and then AI themselves, the big players, the small players providing LLMs. We're seeing all of this experimentation happen. So I think VLEs have to have a foundational platform to build all of that on in order to enable all the future that we're describing.
All right. Nico?
Just final thought. I think ultimately this is going to have to happen in partnership. And is that kind of pull and push that you were talking about? And if the technology moves too slow, you become irrelevant. If the technology moves too fast, then you're kind of losing your user base along the way. So it's about finding that balance. I do think the technology vendors will probably I think we're going to have to be really tight at the hip over the next several years. And really, I do think the technology vendors will play a bigger role in enabling some of the change that needs to happen. And maybe I'll give one example if I can. So one thing that we released inside of Blackboard summer of last year, so about a year ago now, is what I would call kind of one of those step changes to starting to do things a little bit differently or enable things to be done differently, which was the concept of the AI conversation. So this is a new activity where an instructor can define an AI persona, whether that's like an expert or historical figure or a fictitious character, and then they can define like a case study or a scenario that they can play, and the students have to play that out with that AI persona. That's something that was never possible before. It's a different way for students to engage with something, to get deeper into materials, and obviously was developed in partnership with several of the clients that we work with, several of the institutions that we work with, and then you start to see that kind of adoption snowball where it starts slowly, it starts in small pockets in different institutions, then it kind of, if it solves a real problem, it starts to accelerate from there. And so in the last year, we've now seen 1 million unique uses of the AI conversation. Some really interesting one in nursing programs, for example, where they play out different scenarios. And that's a really small example. I think it's just the tip of the iceberg, but it's an example of how technology starts to enable something that really was very difficult to do before.
Sure. And by the way, Anthology, their users conference is next week, so he's rehearsing part of his plenary session.
This was last year.
Oh, okay. But let me just pick up on that, and then we'll get into the big topic that you guys have raised, LLMs and AI. But on this, was that push or pull? Did you guys come up with the idea and then get partner institutions to help develop or partner, or were they asking you for it?
So in this case, it was a little bit of both. So in this case, we were seeing a lot of demand for the underlying need that this is addressing, the underlying problem that it's addressing. In this particular case, we actually came up with the solution, but in collaboration with a whole bunch of institutions as well. So that to me is the right type of partnership, and it is push and pull. And like sometimes the ideas will come from the institution, sometimes, they'll flow both ways. But
I just want to get some other ideas on this specific thing, the push versus pull, where the ideas come from, you react to, or you are pulling them. Any other examples?
So I'll give one example. I think for us, we were really thoughtful about the ethical considerations and transparency around how we built Lumi, which is our AI capabilities within Brightspace. But fast forward, we spent a lot of time looking at research and practice. So Barbara Means and Digital Promise in that group. So we've been partnered with them to look at 7 institutions and really develop those use cases. So as we're iterating and prototyping the next generation, we really want to learn from those institutions what has worked well, what has not worked well, how do we need to tweak the software, where are there areas of opportunity that maybe we didn't see as much initial interest, that maybe we're missing the mark there. But I think historically, when we talked about and we unveiled Lumi last year, for us, it was really about making sure it was transparent, making sure that we had the guardrails in place so nothing can go forward and be deployed in Lumi without human intervention, because for that piece, that in action for us was really critical. So I think we're to your point, we're seeing it on both ends, and I think that partnership has to continue to be in place.
I think it's always push and pull. Some of those ideas come from outside. Some of them come from identifying problems that you see across multiple organizations or institutions, and then you meet in the middle. And one of the great advantages of an open source product is you get a lot of development from the community to address the problems that they have locally. You find out that those are universal. Those can be folded into the core product. You can then develop and innovate on those. That then gets extended and the community develops on top of that. So there's this circular partnership all of the time. And the way that we've addressed AI is very much in that way. We released the AI subsystem before we made investments into significant native AI capability, which I think is important because I don't think any of us really know what kind of AI functionality is going to be useful or affordable or meaningful in the future. So getting the opportunity to see users across 150,000 sites and 460 million people around the world think about what does AI usage in our environment look like, and then begin to collaborate on creating really valuable outcomes in the product. That's a huge advantage, I think, in the way that we can develop, and a huge advantage to those institutions and learners.
I'll add one last piece to the research element. We look closely, in addition to the push-pull with our customer base, we look closely at learning research and brain science as well. Because we know a lot more about how the human brain works and how it learns today than we did even 5-10 years ago. And we all need to be, I think this is where we are trying to push a bit, is what can we learn from that and how can we then think about how we bring that back into the product so that we're encouraging potentially even new modes. I think content creation was such a great example of that and how we work differently. If you look at even like neuroplasticity, you'll see that failure is the #1 way to build neuroplasticity, especially as you get older. How are we thinking about feedback, right, in any of our solutions? How are we bringing those kinds of inputs? So it is push-pull with customer, partner, and our platform, but it's also what are we learning about how we learn and how can we pull that in?
But I want to ask the same question for you that I asked Nico, which is take that one example, feedback, neuroplasticity. Is that something where, okay, our clients and prospective clients are asking for that? Well, the way we're going to implement that is we know we want to implement it this way based on learning science. Or is it a matter of, hey, we know this is something, we need to start introducing it and get schools to give input as we develop it as a different type of feedback?
Yeah, I think it's both in this case, but I will, this is why I say why. In this particular example, it's more us pushing that out. We're like, here's what we're hearing, here's some fundamentals to feedback, but other capabilities that we've done, it will be the opposite. It'll be, no, we're going to, baby step that in. That's been AI for us. We've slowly introduced that to then learn back from institutions and respond back from institutions. So it just depends on the capabilities.
So let's jump into the AI angle. And in particular, one way to look at it. So I could not avoid Roger Larson because he follows people around. I found him on the train. We had a good conversation. But with the current thing, we're talking about, and I'm hearing elements here, and it gets into what is knowledge, but also not just what is knowledge, what is assessment of that knowledge? What exactly is the credential that's coming out of schools that people say, I trust that you do that? Well, with AI, I mean, the amount of things you can get quick information on, it's changing. Now, one extreme view of this that's all too common is cheating, cheating, cheating. But I think it's more complicated than that. It gets into this whole question of knowledge. So take the area even of how does Gen AI and the rapid ability for students, and talking about agency, students can figure out how to summarize notes, research something more efficiently, but they can also copy other stuff without learning. So how does that change where education is going, and what's the VLE role and that knowledge change and including assessments? And I don't mean formalized assessment. How does it change the role of a university ensuring we think these students know the right topics? So what's your role in this?
So after you asked your leading question early this morning and
Yes.
gave us a bit of time to think about it, I did a quick survey. I have 2 university students living in my house right now, my 2 oldest sons, and one of them is graduating from Cardiff University next week with a degree in math. His immediate response to me was this.
Wait, you had your kids help out?
What's that?
You had your kids help out with that question?
Always.
Oh, wow.
Always.
Impressive. Okay.
Always. His immediate response was this issue around knowledge scarcity, but he went further and said the issue is that with knowledge scarcity going away through AI, universities are going to have to begin to justify what they're actually charging for if I can go get it other places. And so he, now you asked me about my kids and I lost my train of thought.
Sorry.
Knowledge scarcity.
You're not supposed to help each other.
Go back to the question.
Well, what's the as schools deal with the change in knowledge and in having value of saying these students knew it? What is the VLE
What's the role
role?
of VLE?
Yeah.
So I think that as that happens and then universities wrestle with that question, one of the things that we can actually help them with is that question of what it is they're actually able to offer. What are the ways in which we can help them distribute differently? What are the ways in which we can help them engage students differently? And I think to your point before, if you think about it as a VLE, actually it's an environment for something much greater than that. much greater than just knowledge distribution, which is one of the things that a lot of times I think gets misplaced as the primary function of the university.
Yep.
I'm going to push you on this knowledge scarcity. Actually disagree with that. I think the knowledge scarcity issue has been prevalent for a long time since the advent of internet. I think that it has raised the bar in terms of LLMs, but I'm going to use my oldest daughter, who's also a college student, as an example, who was a political science major, but taught herself to day trade on TikTok. And now is making thousands of dollars day trading. I think it's more about thinking about motivation. I'm a psychologist by training. So I think that we talk about motivation being internal, but if you think about motivation, it's also an extrinsic, it's a social opportunity, because when you think about motivation, you think about the importance of us as a human society. We want respect, we want status. Those are the things that, as you think about what you're learning, what these students are learning in all of these other venues and areas, they're really motivated to learn because it either improves the quality of their lives, it gives, helps them to get a job. All of these things that, as institutions are redefining how they're thinking about that learning environment, VLEs are going to be there to be able to help them co-construct learning, to create deeper learning experiences. But I think at the fundamental element of this is the motivational piece. And I think that there are things that we can do. I think about Eric Mazur's work, who was a Harvard physicist, right? And how he helps students think about peer instruction. But I think the beautiful thing about that peer instruction piece is how create those concept tests. So instead of asking students, what are the steps of photosynthesis, asking students to be able to determine and talk about what is the role of chlorophyll in photosynthesis, right? So really those higher order level thinking opportunities. I think our roles are to be able to help enable those types of opportunities more seamlessly and create communities so that that motivation, that social piece is there for students.
First of all, I don't want to downplay the problem. I think this is actually the biggest problem that we have right now as an industry is around assessment and how do we evolve assessment. Pretty much every educator that you talk to around the world is basically saying this is a huge problem for me because students are using AI and I haven't evolved my assessment practices, and therefore the learning isn't as deep or meaningful as it may have been in the past. So I do think this is one of the most important challenges for us to solve. I think it's much more than just a VLE problem, though. I think this is one where the VLE will have to support the evolution. I'm not necessarily sure that it's going to drive the evolution.
Okay.
It's hard to tell where things are really going. But what I am starting to see a pattern of in kind of talking to institutions around the world is we may be heading towards kind of a bifurcated assessment strategy where part of the assessment will be, will almost go back to in-person, pen on paper, deliberately no AI allowed. Because of kind of you're trying to build the fundamental skills, etc. And there's things that the VLE can do to support that kind of strand of assessment.
Yeah.
And then there's kind of the second strand, which is where AI is essentially expected because it's going to be in everything. It's going to be in your office. It's going to be everywhere. And you can start to do much more holistic, much more authentic, much more authentic project-based assessment, etc. And again, the VLE can support that. And in terms of the first one, I've actually seen several online schools now that have set up very small kind of physical locations again to get students together for testing, for interaction with educators. And we'll see if that trend continues. But right now, that seems to be where a lot of them are starting to head. And again, VLE can support that, but it's more than just a VLE change.
And
sorry, that was me.
Oh, that was you? Okay. That's what happens when you're taking notes over there. All right, one final question that I do want to open up, see if there are any additional questions. We've noticed big tech recently, and this isn't too surprising. They're really entering the education space much more strongly than they were in the past. And there's a fundamental difference between the underlying platform and capabilities and tapping off of that and the products coming out of EdTech. ChatGPT, students are using it whether you want them to or not. But even Google, if you look at Notebook LM and its capability to summarize, it's pretty stunning what it can do. And that's a product. That's something end users like students do. nothing personal, but none of your companies can deal with that financially, how to compete with them. Or now specialization you might, but my question is, given a difficult ed tech environment financially, given big tech, which is very willing to spend money and is being more aggressive in education, how do you view your relationship with big tech vendors? Does this mean, no, we know education better than them and some of our stuff will compete, or we need to be careful and try to integrate more of what they do because they're going to develop faster? How do you think of big tech productization in education and how it affects your company?
That's a big question.
Yeah. And I did not give any teasers on this question.
No.
So no kids. Yeah.
I think as I think about that question, there are a couple of things that come to mind as I've talked with institutions. I do think that as a VLE provider, when we think about how the architecture of our system was built around learning, full stop, right? But I also work with institutions who have used Notebook LLM or are using some of the ChatGPT functions and are finding some of the hallucinations that are happening are so detrimental to their students of color, right? That they are really concerned about really pulling things internally. And so I think that for us, it is a push or pull as well in terms of being able to support institutions who are trying to go down that avenue, but also providing a little bit of a space for institutions who are thinking about the long-term usage, the ethical considerations, the transparency. There's some concerns around transparency behind how the models are being trained that we have to be aware of. And to your earlier point, we don't know where we're going to be in 2 to 3 years. None of us do in this room. And so I think the capacity to be able to have that complex conversation is where we are. And really, to Melissa's earlier point, being able to lead with learning science and lead with pedagogical approaches is a place that we need to stand very, very firm.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Just to come back to your question, I do believe that the big tech players and the educational technology players are going to come together a lot more over the next several years.
Okay.
I think, and because of what you said, I think they own a lot of the large language models, a lot of the technology, and I don't think there's like that we can actually compete with that. I think we have to integrate it in really meaningful ways so we can create an environment for students where they can have a very holistic learning environment, and that's going to involve a lot of that. I'm very happy that we are a Microsoft Inner Circle partner, and that we're at AWS's highest level of partnership as well, because I think that'll be necessary. You actually see it at our conference next week. We've got some new product announcements. Several of those are in very close collaboration with Microsoft, with AWS. I think that's where it's going.
Any teasers? We're going to keep it quiet if you give us teasers. No. All right. So
I thought that was a it.
I do think big tech, both AI big tech, which are the new entrants, right, or even some of the existing entrants are bringing AI to the table, but we have new like Anthropic and others. And big tech on the consumer side, most of that tech is a business to consumer experience. And that coming together, I 100% agree. We do the same. We have partnerships with all of the big tech players and all of the AI players. And in that, though, they need our help too. And I think it is our responsibility as VLEs to help them educate on what do you need as institutions. So everything from understanding and navigating how to partner with you as an institution, as opposed to how to go directly to the consumer and get a lot of clicks. I mean, that's the motivation for the majority of big tech. It's, I want more users earlier on in their lives, so I keep them for their entire life. And it can be meaningful. It can have positive impact on education because a learner has a consistent experience. But at the same time, they don't necessarily understand how to partner. Some do better than others with institutions. Perhaps Microsoft and AWS do much more of that and have a long history of that. But some of the other big tech players don't. And so it's on us as VLEs and as ed tech vendors more broadly to help educate them on privacy standards, how do you interact, who owns data, right? That's a whole interesting question that we all as educators have not answered yet. Does the institution own some of the data? Do end users own the data? So we have to partner together and help craft that conversation as we partner so that we can serve you best and we can ultimately serve your learners best.
Thanks. Scott?
Yes, I agree entirely that there is an inevitable coming together from a functional perspective because there are a limited number of players with the resources to build the kinds of things we're talking about, and that capability is valuable. But I think we have a responsibility to make sure we are bringing that to an educational community with a huge amount of agency institutionally, that even if we're bringing it together, we aren't facilitating some kind of technological entrapment, that we are not the ones who are enabling a individual user to get stuck in a single huge company for the rest of their lives. So there has to be the ability for universities to choose the model that they're using behind the technology, to be able to incorporate their own LLMs if they're developing them internally, and to be able to change those at any time on the basis of strategic changes that run counter to the university's values or overall the values of higher education generally. So I think that's the way we have to play. Yes, come together, make that available, but make sure that there's still choice at the institution.
And that needs to be transparent.
Yep.
Transparency is critical for what.
Yep. By the way, these are very good answers, and I'm glad I didn't give you any heads up on what I was asking. I did. We have about 5. Yes.
We have 5 minutes, and I've got 3 questions from our online audience that I'd love to share.
Okay.
So one is on digital accessibility. All platforms celebrate their digital accessibility compliance, but the human aspect of accessibility is often missing. Baked into VLEs is complexity of navigation, overload of terminology, and features. Content developed using platform tools are locked in, PDF, EPUB exports, unavailable to be changed by the learner for their own needs. Future-ready, learner-focused agility requires a better understanding. Comments, please.
Yes. Yeah, and we don't have to all answer all the
Yeah,
questions,
just-
but at least get it started.
Yeah, I have one really quick one. Since our origins, we've had an open API structure. We're not fully open source quite like, I mean, we are open source, but not everything like perhaps Moodle, but we've always had a student API. So, and I think we will, and we continue to add and build to that. So that already gives student agency around thinking about how do they build, especially as AI brings building your own productivity tools. Perhaps you don't even go use one as a learner. Perhaps you build your own. That student API can help you leverage how do you connect that into Canvas, for example. Now, there are some risks with that too, right? And how we're thinking about developing moving forward. But I think that's one way to get at this too, is how do you open up platforms or VLEs so that students can build meaningfully integrations for themselves and have that agency.
Yep. Yeah, one for Nico, and then let's make sure we have time for.
I think we've started to see some kind of like advancements in this area with things like students now being able to choose which alternative formats they want to use for which piece of content. So I think that's starting to evolve over the next several years. We'll start to see more, I think, around adaptation, around personalization of content as well. So I actually think AI holds a tremendous amount of promise from an accessibility and personalization perspective.
Yeah, let's go to the next.
Thank you. I do have one more then. So do you think your platforms give enough attention to online learning when platforms are primarily used for campus learning? How do you feel that?
I mean, I'd go back to the comment that was made earlier this morning, which is actually it is a spectrum. Almost every student is learning online in some capacity now. There simply are some who never set foot on campus. And so I think that differentiation is rapidly shrinking. I actually think, for the most part, you look at any of these platforms, there are thousands of things in every one of these platforms that universities don't use. Like, there is nowhere that it's implemented that the university is really using every single thing, every place. They can all accommodate learners either on campus or at a distance. And my point is, I think that is actually part of the utilization decisions that are made when a system is implemented, as opposed to the things that are specifically in the design. These platforms can all serve students at a distance. They can all serve students on campus. And I think everybody on the stage would love to be working closer with universities to really think about how to best use the platform for those specific audiences within a university.
Yeah, Nico?
Two things. So, I mean, first of all, I think the VLE of the future is going to have to be one where it can almost seamlessly support any type of delivery, whether that's on campus, hybrid, fully online, short courses, certifications, etc., and almost where the same subject matter can be offered in kind of flexibly in different modalities. So I think that's what that VLE of the future looks like. I do want to comment a little bit now that I'm on this stage that I do think, like to your point as well, there's a lot of historical capabilities in VLEs that I actually think are weighing us down a little bit. I think the biggest problem that this market has is the RFP process.
Oh, amen.
And this is kind of a challenge to the room as well, because if you start from a long list of features that have to be in the platform, you are going to hurt usability and intuitiveness. So if there's one thing that I can ask for, let's look more at vision, direction, overall experience, rather than a long list of all of the different things you can think of.
And I will point out, this is an area that Europe leads the US. The EU procurement directives put our RFP processes to shame. But yes, I definitely agree with that. Okay, well, this has been excellent, and I've appreciated your answers and very heartfelt answers. And from the things I know, it's very accurate. It's not just marketing. That's what I appreciate, your authenticity. So I want to thank all of our panelists for this discussion.
We should, but it's over.
Thanks.